Can you state your name and occupation?
Um, my name is David Leva. I work with the USDA. I'm a student intern working in plant pathology.
Did you experience a transition from in person to online during that pandemic?
Yes, initially we rolled back our efforts and I ended up doing a lot of work from home stuff. And as time went on, we eventually went back to a conditional workplace where only a number of employees were allowed in certain areas at a time.
In what ways has the pandemic changed your outlook on life? Can be personal, professional, educational goals.
It has made things a little bit scarier. I have a bit of a background learning microbiology and various other bio courses where we learned about the transition of the SIV virus and I believe it was chimpanzees or simians and how it transversed to HIV into a human, the human variant. And we see a lot of that in how bats carry a strain of COVID that raw does not affect humans, but there over time was an intermediate species that was able to carry it over. And so just seeing how virulent and effective HIV has been, and I believe it was the late 90s or towards the end of the 20th century at least, how it ravaged many communities. It's kind of scary to see how COVID is affecting families, especially with the new breakthrough strains that just about every one of my family has been vaccinated, and almost all of it, no, every single one of us were breakthrough infections. So, admittedly, I do have a bleak outlook, but hopeful with the booster shots coming out and resistances being developed and how the immune system tackles things.
How has the pandemic changed the way you think about the future?
It it certainly brings up some interesting facets to consider. Like growing up, we learned a lot about history's greatest disasters, namely like plague or the instances of what was it, Salmonella typhi with Typhoid Mary, and you never really think, especially in this modern age of ours, we got information beamed to us in a matter of seconds. You never think that something as minor as a little outbreak could just plunge the world into what was a stagnation, essentially. And so it has made me a little more wary of how I conduct myself regarding hygiene and sterilization. While it's not the statement isn't intended to levy blame at anyone or one thing. It was just serendipity, I suppose, how we ended up getting infected. I do tend to take care of myself working in a lab environment, going back to school with Sac State and how they manage their environments. It's constant hand sanitizing and washing your hands. Well, you should be doing that regardless. But just one person got sick, and it ended up cascading down to four of us out of five.
What are you looking forward to most if the pandemic is less ever present?
I'm looking forward to just getting on with my life, moving out of things in terms of getting back to some degree of normalcy, and while the unintended consequences of that is just the usual traffic that we're experiencing on the daily now that people are coming back. The other thing I'm a little excited for is it kind of happened towards the end of my academic career, or at least this phase of it. This semester, the end of this fall semester should mark my graduation, barring any unforeseen circumstances. But I'm pretty excited to take what I have learned over my academic career, and my experiences with COVID and seeing what I can do with it as a fresh biological sciences graduate.
What role has social media and news coverage played in your experience during the pandemic?
Social media has been very charged, to say the least, and perhaps for better or for worse, especially with the unfortunate rise of public discourse going on. We had various demonstrations going on throughout the year of 2020 with various facilities being taken and protested, and we had a lot of misinformation being spread as well as exaggerations as well. And ultimately, what was concerning for myself was, there were protests and demonstrations that I fully support. Just I worried about the way that they were handling their hygiene, and in terms of just transferring. There's a phrase called I believe it's called super spreader events, where just a conglomerate of people amass in certain areas and try, when it's just a group of people. And then that's also why they set or they recommend limitations on gatherings and social gatherings. But it just becomes increasingly more difficult because, you know, I liken it a bit to a mosh pit. While there's not perhaps a lot going on, the masks do work. It's just when you're adjusting it, or you're moving around, or you're interacting with other people, and then you can sterilize yourself and put on a mask at the moment. Your What is effectively your safety net is removed. You're now spreading it a little bit, and just like I had previously stated, it just takes one happening to get yourself or many other people sick. So ultimately, it has been concerning, but I do find a lot of interesting happenings regarding the developments, especially with Dr. Fauci, and I think there have been some really good learning moments that have happened. One thing that became very evident to myself is not to elevate myself above, but as a bystander, not everyone has microbiology or levels of biological understanding and comprehension that perhaps someone like myself or a peer taking my classes would understand. And I think that for better or for worse, a lot of people end up being more informed, because when you're informed about the issue is when you're able to start to make progress in combating it.
For the final question, I'm going to ask my own. Currently, as a nation, do you see the pandemic ever truly being gone? Because there have been ups, downs, and then there's neutral, with people being vaccinated, people refusing to be vaccinated, and then those who are vaccinated in certain areas refuse to wear masks.
So, and it's not to have a doom-minded mentality. Just we understand that we've come to understand many things, albeit our basic knowledge of the virus and its inner workings are still barely even knee deep at that, in terms of just its understanding. But with so much attention going on, we have been able to know and understand its two of its particular conformations. So we have the S1 conformation, which, as I understand it, acts as a stealthing, like a bit of a cloaking mechanism, and it's what gets it to evade our immune system. And then once it hits the spot, usually the lungs, that it wants to hit, it goes into its S2 conformation, and that's when the virus really starts harming or causing harm. But with how quickly it's developed, the Delta variant in particular, and other types. COVID-19, their designation is 19 for a reason. It just so happens that 19 is the one that affects us. We saw COVID-20 in some instances. But to answer your question, I'm under the impression that no. I believe it might even become a type of virus that requires serovars to handle. And serovars, if you think of, what's an apt comparison? If you think of like those medical assays where it's like rows and columns of needles, and you get shot, or you go and get shot for all of these, and one of them gets hit. That's just one. It's like one group of strains of viruses, and each one of them has their own vaccine, but that vaccine is only good at treating one of them. And so I kind of see it going down that way, especially with other how virulent other viruses and bacteria become, especially when we begin to select for the virulence factors that they exhibit. Then life finds a way. They will eventually mutate or develop stronger or even more volatile methods of attacking their intended target. But that's not to say that it has to affect us. I do believe it will be around, but it shouldn't have to affect us in the same way, especially now with all the resources and time we've put towards combating it. So, yeah, I think it will continue to be a part of our lives, and I think at some point it might just be something we get a type of vaccine for, like we do with the flu every year or every other year.
Interesting. Are you familiar at all with CRISPR?
CRISPR, I have learned about it a little bit.
Do you think it can be used to eliminate COVID?
My memory about CRISPR is a bit hazy, so I might need to ask a few clarifying questions. But isn't that genetic or not enhancing, but genetic modification?
Yeah, genetic engineering.
So, as I understand it, I think CRISPR could potentially work. The issue when it comes to essentially attacking the virus itself is not giving it a host to attach to. The virus survives long enough to invade the host, it bypasses host's immune system, and then replicate in its desired location. If something were to come along that pathway and interrupt it, other studies have shown that they tend to develop newer virulence factors, like if there were I believe it's called it's an enzyme that affects RNA replication. So if it's it can get to infecting the host, but if it can't reproduce via, basically replication, then that kind of kills it there. And so what we ended up seeing in some of these studies is they ended up mutating, and because they mutated, that very specific segment that our vaccines and medicines were attacking was no longer useful, because while it still targeted the ones that didn't mutate, the ones that did mutate were able to reign free. So regarding CRISPR, we would have to figure out with very specific detail what's being attacked, what and how it's even being attacked, because as I understand it, it largely goes for the lungs, the COVID virus. And so there's something about the lungs that causes it to be the ideal target. And so we would either have to genetically modify our immune system to be able to detect it preemptively, or we would have to do something about our general bodily makeup and perhaps even strengthen the lungs alternatively.
This concludes the end of the interview. Thank you.